Hello everyone and welcome to London South East College's landmark lecture powered by Online Open Days and delivered by SpringPod. Now in this session we'll be reflecting on the past 4 years on how the further education landscape has changed and what lies ahead. Now my name is Joe and I'll be introducing and closing today's session, but just a couple of pointers before we get started. The talk should last about 45 minutes and please do ask questions to our speakers. They'd absolutely love to answer them. You can use the Q&A panel which is available on the right hand side of your screen. Now today we're joined by the FE Commissioner, Sir Richard Atkins CBE, FE Editor of the TES, Julia Belgutay, and of course Dr. Sam Barrett, OBE. I wanted to make sure I got that right for you. We're very lucky to have them here with us today. Good afternoon and welcome to you all. Without any further delay, Julia, I understand that I'm handing over to you first. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this lecture. My name is Julia Belgutay, and I'm the head of FE at TES, and I'll be your chair, so all the difficult questions will be directed to me, and I'll filter them through to Sam and Richard later. Let me now first introduce Dr. Sam Barrett, Principal of London South East Colleges. Sam was appointed Principal of Bromley College in 2010 and oversaw a number of successive mergers since, including England's first three-way merger in 2016, so she's not one to shy away from a challenge. That then created London South East Colleges, and London and South East Colleges Group, which she now heads up, was established in 2017. It would be remiss of me to not point out that last October, Sam was named FE Leader of the Year at the TES FE Awards, recognizing all the work that she's done in the sector. I would also like to introduce Sir Richard Atkins, the FE Commissioner and your main speaker for today. Richard was appointed Further Education Commissioner in October 2016, having been a college principal, most recently at Exeter College, for over 2 decades. He's spent over 35 years working in FE colleges, first as a teacher and then as a leader, and has held a number of national positions along the way. After 4 years in post, he's due to step down as FE Commissioner shortly, but first he's now here to tell us more about his journey and the way ahead for FE. So let me first hand you over to Sam.
Thanks very much, Julia. And thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. Your knowledge of and your support for the FE sector has made you our perfect host to deliver this event today, and we're really grateful for you to taking this on for us. We're also enormously grateful to our speaker, Sir Richard Atkins, for agreeing to deliver the latest in our series of landmark lectures here at London South East Colleges. Particularly proud because, as Julia's just summarised, Richard's had an incredibly busy 4 years in the role of FE Commissioner, and we are really looking forward to hearing his insights, leadership lessons and thoughts and reflections on FE moving forward. And I've had the enormous privilege of working a little bit more closely with Richard over the last year as a national leader of further education, and I can tell you from that personal experience that, you know, his purposeful approach and his passion for our sector has supported many leaders and many colleges through significant institutional change over the last 4 years. And without doubt, I know that he's helped raise the profile of our sector in the policy context and in the wider economic agenda that colleges are now front and centre stage of with the white paper. And I think that amplified position for our sector puts us in a really strong position moving forward. And so Richard was the obvious person for us to invite, really, in the context of both his experience and achievements, to help us on the day that we here at London South East Colleges launch our new book, which has been 4 years in the making prior to our mergers, and it's entitled Leading Change and Inspiring Learners. And from later this week, that book will be available on Amazon. But for everybody here on the call, there's going to be a link for you to download a copy of that book. And what that really does is it charts the many changes that we've undergone as an institution, celebrates those successes and highlights the incredibly hard work and commitment of staff, leaders and stakeholders supporting our college in South East London over the last 4 years. It's by no means a how-to guide, but it very much, I think, provides some insight into the lessons we've learnt about changing culture, about merging organisations during what's been the most incredibly challenging of times for our sector and for our country. So just briefly from me, I'd just like to say a quick thank you to everybody who's contributed to that story, many of whom are online here today with us today, and including, of course, yourself, Richard, and your predecessor, who've both contributed enormously and supported us on our journey. We're really excited about what the future holds and really looking forward to your reflections too today. So I'd like to hand over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm delighted to be here. It's a real privilege to be asked. I'm just going to call down my slides, I think. So there we are. Great. Thank you very much indeed. Right. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to be here, Sam. And thank you very much for inviting me. There are numerous reasons why I'm so pleased to come to London South East Colleges. Firstly, because, as you say, my predecessor, the late David Collins, recommended didn't he, in a review that the merger of the three colleges in Bexley, Bromley and Greenwich should take place. Secondly, I spent part of the weekend reading your excellent Ofsted report from March 2019, and it's a huge credit to all the staff, to the leaders, to yourself, Sam, particularly to the governors, that you've made such a success of this three-way merger in such a short time. And the strengths that the Ofsted report lays out on its first page are a roll call of good practice as far as I'm concerned. So congratulations to you and everybody else involved on doing such a great job in South East London, and indeed such a great job for further education in leading the way with such a successful merger. What I was going to do this afternoon was talk for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, a little bit about my background. I think you'll find I'm authentically a further education college person. And the career that I've been fortunate enough to have in this sector, it's coming up to 40 years shortly since I started. And then some reflections, both on leadership by myself and by those that I've seen, and also a little bit of the lessons I've drawn from being the FE Commissioner for the last 4.5 years. But before I started, I just wanted to say that the real fundamental journey I've been on is the one that's on the quote there. Before you are a leader, success is all about growing and knowing yourself. When you are a leader, success is all about growing others. The reason I've been in the sector for 40 years, I probably put too long over the first sentence in order to get to the second one. But I do know that the best leaders I see are very, very much about developing others in their team more widely. And this sector, further education colleges, we need as many excellent leaders like Sam Barrett as we can possibly develop. So for me, the key to leadership, whether it's at a course level, at a department level, at a college level, is about developing and growing the potential of others. Now, I won't bore you with my entire CV and my long history. My first proper job was in the 1970s in a shop in Knightsbridge you would have heard of, called Harrods. And I took a temporary job there, between temporary jobs, really, having slightly lost my way, I think, after leaving school and one thing and another. And day one, I was sweeping up in the floristry department. It was a very different Harrods in those days, wasn't quite as glossy as it is today, and it's passed through one or two different ownerships since then. But I stayed for several years, went on day release and block release to College of Distributive Trades and Cassio College in Watford, both FE colleges at the time. Became a manager in the store and so on. And then after doing some traveling, I decided I wanted to teach, became a teacher, qualified, worked in schools for about 3 years. And then, as you can see, nearly 40 years ago, next academic year, I started as what was then called a lecturer grade 1 and student liaison officer at Chichester College. And the world's changed in FE since then in lots and lots of ways, and it'll continue to change. I think one of the great things about the FE sector has been its adaptability, its flexibility, both for learners and indeed for policymakers and politicians. And that's required a particular mindset, I think, amongst leaders in this sector. You've got to enjoy change. You've got to want the change to bring benefits for learners and for employers and other stakeholders, but particularly for learners. So I jumped in with both feet, and we had a white paper then, a bit like today really, called New Training Initiative, NTI, and it launched probably a decade of change. BTEC had just come together, Beck and Tech. I taught BTEC, YTS was being launched, and then other programs that you can see. And of course, shows you how long I've been around. Students, learners with learning difficulties and disabilities didn't really come to FE colleges in those days. It was only in the late 80s, early 90s, and that we began to see that sort of provision develop and a wider, more inclusive FE college develop. And I was very much involved in all of that work, really, making my way through the system. What I learned from that was whatever we were doing, whether I was launching a new initiative or teaching my BTEC or I taught A-level as well for a while, you had to have this relentless focus on learners and on their success and their well-being. Been a principal twice, first at Yeovil and then somewhere that Sam and I share in common, Exeter. I was there for about 14 years and you know, fortunately the college went on a journey to outstanding, and we were outstanding for a number of years, and you know, fantastic journey for me and for the college and for the city. And I learned a lot, you know, from that journey. So at different times, I think I've been principal of colleges that have been judged, you know, satisfactory, good and outstanding at different times. And to be honest, that's been ideal experience for this role as FE Commissioner, which I started in 2016. I retired in April, or I said I'd retired in April 2016, and I think I thought I'd do some part-time work, and then I got appointed to this job in the September, and I've loved it really. The work's been very, very rewarding. During my time, we've done about 59 intervention assessments, the more difficult part of the work. We've done 95 unpublished private diagnostic assessments with colleges, looking at the capacity and capability of governance and leadership and at the sustainability of the college. And I've worked with colleagues such as Sam to launch a number of initiatives like National Leaders of FE, principals like Sam, excellent principals sharing their good practice and supporting others. National Leaders of Governance, where I've got a number of chairs and heads of governance doing similar work. The Principals Reference Group, which the department now use very frequently, particularly during the pandemic, as a source for consultation before policies and guidelines are produced and so on. College Collaboration Fund and so on. Most of the things I've introduced were simply drawn from my own lessons as a principal in seeking to improve quality in a college, really. I always found that support was more important than support was the key thing initially, as much support as you could provide, and sharing best practice was critical. People learn, in my experience, a lot of people learn much better from their peers and from others than they do from being told how to do it or sent written instructions. And we operated that throughout my time as a principal, especially at Exeter. We worked very hard at that. And I've tried to work with others to embed that sort of thinking within the sector, that we've been a very competitive sector for all sorts of obvious reasons about learner numbers and financial stability. And we're also more isolated than schools because there's far fewer of us, and often there's quite a geographical distance, one college from another. And so many staff won't know many other staff who work other than at their own college. Many governors won't know other governors. So I've been working hard with colleagues to try and get the sharing best practice, working together collaboratively, learning from each other, more embedded. It obviously existed before, but I've tried to make it more structured and more commonplace. And people like Sam Barrett have been brilliant ambassadors and examples of that. So taking me through that work as commissioner and my work as a principal, I tried to hang on to a series of values and principles, and I know that will be important to you at London and South East Colleges Group. Those are the ones that I was reflecting on the other day. I've talked a little bit about the relentless focus. I learned that very early on that if as a leadership or as college governors you focus on the finance and the buildings and all the businessy things that are of importance, but you in any way neglect the relentless focus on learners, you won't achieve the potential of the college. I personally am very committed to inclusion. I've always enjoyed working in colleges and indeed being principal colleges with a very wide range of provision. And that flies in the face, doesn't it, of some government guidelines over the last 40 years, which have said, why don't colleges specialise a lot more? I've always found that if you're serving a particular community, you want to serve as wide a proportion of that as you're able to do well to a good standard. And so I've always been as comfortable working with students with learning difficulties and disabilities, or working with level 1 programs, or with adult access programs, as I have been with A levels or BTEC level 3 or HE. And I think that distinguishes FE people and the FE sector, is that sense of breadth and inclusion. Employability and independence have been really key to all of the work I've been involved in, whether that be apprenticeships and YTS before that being employer-based, or whether it be college-based technical programs with work placement or progression into work and employer advisory groups. But developing in learners a high degree of employability and therefore enhancing their independence is really important to me. I was just going on to say what a brilliant, I'm sure Sam anticipated it, to say what a brilliant initiative the Friday Food Bank initiative was, that London South East colleges led and was picked up around the country by different colleges as an example of community leadership. And the other one would be autonomy. I think that colleges are best given a reasonable degree of autonomy, because their governors and staff and leadership are best placed to meet local need. I'll now move fairly quickly to the rest of the presentation, assuming you can hear me, to allow time for the discussions and the questions. As FE Commissioner, I think I said earlier, we've done a lot of work, a lot of support work, a lot of network building, and also some difficult work around intervention and change. And those are some of the lessons I've drawn from the reports we've written, both privately and for public reasons, and also working with great leaders in the sector. The importance of good governance and leadership, the importance of having values and purpose, diversity, support and accountability within governance, great leadership teams and empowering teams, and devolved decision making within colleges, linked to accountability with strong support. Sharing best practice, I talked about, encouragement, but having clear performance indicators so you can assess how learners and how staff are making progress, spending time together. Very difficult during the pandemic with the screens. We've just seen that in the last 10 minutes. Really important. I can't wait for colleges to be fully open again. And then in extremis, firm intervention, and that was something I had to practice both in terms of individual courses in college and equally individual colleges within the sector, but something to be as a last resort really, but sometimes the only way to improve things for learners is firm intervention. The majority of what I see in FE is good and outstanding governance and leadership, and given the small margins between success and failure in FE, I think that generally governors and leaders in this sector do a really, really excellent job. So the lessons I've drawn from time as a principal, the 40-year career, and the time as a commissioner is, first of all, change is a constant. Currently, we've got T levels, we've got the white paper, we're still embedding the apprenticeship reforms. What we've got with the new skills partnerships being developed in local areas. For me, that's been the story of the last 40 years, is colleges constantly having to adapt and change to meet local needs and demands, but doing an amazingly good job at doing that and being extremely inclusive in doing it. And for me, making it the most fascinating part of the education landscape in this country. The margins, I've said, between success and failure are small, both financial and in terms of quality. Good governance and leadership is critical. You're like a good football referee. When it's going well, as it is at London South East colleges, you don't notice it that much. Learners don't choose to come to your college because the governance is great. But I tell you, if things start going wrong, people quite quickly say, what are the governors doing about it? What are the leaders doing about it? And then this relentless focus on learners, obviously on recruiting them and right student, right course, but particularly on supporting them, their welfare, their progress, measuring their progress, encouraging them to meet their targets and to fulfill their potential and their achievements at the end. And colleges do a really good job of that. Not all colleges do it consistently. It's hard because of the range of work that we do and the different types of learners and programs. the very best colleges seem to be able to do it consistently across full-time apprenticeships, HE, possibly in the academies and schools they run in their multi-academy trusts like your own and so on. So it's when working to its full potential, FE is truly awesome. I thought the questions we might talk about, one would be, what would the longer lasting changes be? Now, rather than me go on and talk about those, why don't we go back to Julia and Sam and take some questions, Julia, and open that up into more of a discussion.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. I like when you do my work for me and tell me what questions I should be asking you. It makes my job a lot easier. Let me start off with you, Sam, though. How do you hope that the new book that you introduced right in the beginning, which is called Leading Change and Inspiring Learners, will help others in the sector who are managing change, particularly as we're beginning to see, implementation of the white paper and so on?
Yeah, thanks for that, Julia. The important thing about the journey that we've been on and the book that we've written really is that it's quite a reflective document. It's certainly not an academic book. It's a very practical book really about our experiences, and it's much more about what we did and the learning reflections that have come from that. So what we hope is that others will be able to take ideas or inspiration from that. It's very much a historical record for those of us who've worked with and journeyed through the process, and it marks and celebrates not just the things that we've done well, but also highlights the challenges that we've faced. And I think there's lots of lessons there in terms of how to implement or not to implement things. And I suppose more than anything, we hope that it just serves as a useful record of our journey, but also supports other leaders in the sector who are managing similar periods of change, because we know, as Richard has said, change is relentless in our sector, and there are many aspects in terms of leadership, governance, structures, ways of working, ways of managing risk, and in particular for us, I think, developing a culture around accountability and autonomy, which we've continued to flex as we've evolved, and we've continued to rein in or let out within and across our campuses, based on how successful we've been, how risky things have been, how risk averse our governors may have been, and what indeed the challenges are really. So I think that for us, one key learning point, I think, from this book is to just reflect on the extent to which in periods of change, as leaders and governors, we're able to really align autonomous ways of working, which we all crave, the independence, the expertise, the knowledge to be able to do our jobs for ourselves, with a degree of accountability for those decisions and the impact that then that has on both the corporate organisation and the experience of the individual.
Well, that's mostly for other leaders in FE. If we're going to do a little bit of a sales pitch, you've said it's available on Amazon. Who should be going to buy it?
Well, I think it is for our colleagues who work in the sector. My experience, and I think it's been well documented, there is a real paucity of literature about the FE sector. Whether you talk about the sector in an academic sense or you talk about it in a good practice sense, if you put in further education colleges on Amazon, you'll find very few books, a few toolkits, a few how-tos, a fantastic book written about 15 years ago by the principal of Runshaw College called How to Create an Outstanding College, and a wonderful FE Managers Toolkit created by Richard's predecessor, David Collins. Beyond that, there's a small number of how to teach in FE books, but very few about how to manage. And I think what we've tried to do here is to take our experience of implementing policy with our experience of running a college on the ground in a local community to meet the local needs of learners, employers, and our local stakeholders. And with the experience we have collectively and individually of professional skills like, how to teach, how to manage staff, how to manage manage finance effectively, how to manage risk, how to manage building an estate. And we've put that into a practical experience with some reflections, really. So we hope it adds to that limited resource for both students of FE and practitioners within the sector as well.
Thank you so much for that. Richard, let me come to you next. As you look back on your role over the past 4.5 years, what do you think has been the biggest achievement, or what have you been, proudest of in that time?
I'm very pleased and very proud that the sector is in a better place now than it was 4 years ago. That's the first thing to say. I think 2015-16, we had something like a dozen inadequate colleges from Ofsted. We had a significant number of colleges going into serious financial difficulty, and we had serious funding problems, really. We hadn't seen much in the way of funding changes by then for 4 or 5 years, and by the time funding changed last year, it was nearer a decade. I think that was a really tough period. The area reviews, and I chaired about a third of those, all very difficult. Now, the last thing I want to do is pretend that we're in the land of milk and honey now, and that we've all got, but it is better. We only had, of GFE and sixth form college, we only had one inadequate college in 2019-20. We are no longer getting colleges ringing up saying we're going to run out of money and we can't pay the payroll next week or next month. Colleges are financially more sustainable in the last 12-18 months with the funding increases last year. So I suppose one of the things I'm going out with, because I'm a lifer in FE, is a more optimistic sense, to be honest, than when I came in. I knew it was difficult when I came in. I knew we had to have area reviews, we had to have consolidation. I knew that the funding was tough. I didn't know it would stay tough for as long as it did, but I am more optimistic about the future. There are many aspects of the white paper which isn't revolutionary in many ways, it's evolutionary, which I think is a better outcome. But as Sam says, we'll need to continue to constantly adapt and change as we go along. Not much, I suppose, a very small number of the colleges that got into real difficulty raised my eyebrows. I'm a believer in autonomy. I've put that as one of my core values. I've seen autonomy work. It's working very well at London South East colleges. And I've seen it not work very well. And Sam and I have talked about 1 or 2 colleges where autonomy was taken advantage of, in my view, and people lost sight of the core purpose. And that's why I kept coming back to the relentless focus on teaching and learning and the learners that you're there to serve. And if you're doing really well and you branch out into some little, training activity or something allied to your core business and you're doing well, I fully understand that. But I've obviously been to literally a small number of colleges who've gone hell for leather into all sorts of things they didn't really know very much about. And of course, that leads to neglect of the core business. And that's unforgivable to me in terms of the local learners and the people for whom that college may well be their only place on which they're going to make progress with social mobility and gaining achievements. So a few of those cases have certainly raised my eyebrow. But the most pleasurable part has been working, as I said at the beginning, with some of the great leaders, national leaders of FE, national leaders of governance, principals reference group. I think the caliber of leadership in this sector is very high. I say that as a university governor, former school governor. I'm not saying that all their governance isn't good, but the challenge in FE is huge, and the need to be agile, on the ball. And I always think the combination of being both strategic, I'm sure Sam has to think about both Southeast London, London more widely, the region, and at the same time be able to deep dive into why, level 1 provision in something or other isn't doing as well this year. I don't see that the same complexity as a university governor, nor have I seen it when I've been a school governor. There have been lots of issues, but I've never seen the challenge. So when I see the good leaders, and we've now got 80% of our colleges judged good or outstanding, some of those are absolutely inspiring individuals, and the sector is very lucky to have them.
So you've already talking about leadership. So my next question is about that, actually. What characteristics or behaviors do you think aspiring leaders need to succeed in the sector today and in the future?
And the first one is obviously around people skills and empathy, isn't it, really? Leadership, FE is about people. It's a people business. And that's why when things go wrong, often it's about people. The indicator might be money, or it might be students not succeeding, but you'll usually find that there is quite a big human element in it. And that's true of a course team that isn't delivering successful achievements, as it is of a whole college where the leadership may not be doing a good job. So it's a people business. So you've got to be able to get on with people, empathise with people, get on with a wide range of people. You know, a level 4 HND student is very different to a SEND student. I mean, you know, one of the things I miss about being a principal, things like student awards evenings and celebrations of success. And you'll know yourself, I mean, you need to be able to do that in so many different ways in an FE college. So we had a graduation ceremony, I'm sure Sam does, and I dressed up and did all that. But actually, my favourite would be a SEND evening where we would have a celebration of success with the parents, and they'd all tell me that they never thought that their children would ever achieve that level of independence, and that is so rewarding for everybody involved. So I think what's magical about FE is that range of students, range of people. So I think leaders today and in the future have got to be good people. In my view, they've then got to be able to juggle this balance all the time between getting the highest quality out of a limited resource, and you've got to manage both effectively. And usually, if one gets out of kilter, so if you spend too much, you'll be in trouble. Equally, if you neglect your learners, you'll be in trouble. And I'm an old traditionalist. I always had 2 deputies, you know, a finance director and a curriculum. And the 3 of us, I felt, were the absolute pivotal point in the college, and getting us to work as a team cohesively. Some of the colleges I visited which have problems, you've got a finance director locked up in a room at one end of the corridor and somebody else working on a curriculum plan at the other end. And when the 2 meet in about November, everybody wonders why it's all going wrong and they didn't plan to. So building teams, cohesive teams, we put a lot of work into team building, away days, all sorts of things to build teams, lots of 360-degree feedback, insights and profiling. We did quite a lot of all of that. Not because there was one right way to do it, but it built up within the team. It built up a camaraderie. We got to know each other better. So building teams, getting on with people, balancing finance and curriculum. And obviously you need a combination that you see in FE very acutely of business acumen and educational commitment. So you need a massive passion for education and learners. Not everybody wants to work with I've discovered nobody wants to work with the least advantaged. You know, some people are quite happy working with the more privileged. You've got to have some of that. You've got to really want it. But on the other hand, you've got to have enough business acumen. And I'm sure Sam would agree with me. So one of the colleges Sam and I talked to, again, well, usually they haven't got the right mix of those 2. And you've got to have both, really.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I learned in my early career from the very first principal I worked for just after incorporation is that we are essentially running, however we're classified as a sector, a public service in a business-like way. And that principle has really sort of stuck with me throughout my career. And you also learn a lot. You learn as much about how not to do it from colleges that are struggling and failing as you do from colleges with leaders who are doing really, really well. And that experience, I think, and that knowledge and skills carries you through into having some of the views and disciplines, if you like, that Richard has described. But I think that beyond that, something that I really value and I see in my own colleagues, but also in other successful colleges, there is an absolute resilience and a determination, but also there's a very ethical stance in the leadership teams. You know, there is a good breadth of knowledge and skills, and that, you know, is what keeps the college surviving, because the attention is in the detail. And as Richard has described, the strategic detail, it's often the small strategic detail that catches you out, not the big strategic picture. And there's lots of examples of colleges where there's been, ambition, strategic direction, but then the execution and the detail has sometimes caught you out. And that we have a saying here at LSEC, you know, which many colleges I'm sure also do, about, you know, only being as strong as our weakest links. And we do those deep dives, and we know that it's the strategic detail that can sometimes catch us out. And I think think that requirement to be able to be agile, to do the deep dives, as well as to do the important strategic positioning, is really very much at the heart of a college being able to stay resilient, adaptable, and succeed in what we know is a rapidly changing economy, but also a sector which has had significant policy intervention and change. And I think keeping your feet on the ground, keeping rooted in your local community, and knowing the breadth, the depth and the expertise that you have, and how that is able to reflect local community needs, is, I think, at the very much at the heart of both what we're now seeing in the white paper and at the heart of those community-based colleges that are being successful.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was very comprehensive and very useful. Richard, what do you envisage the UK's further education sector looking like by 2030, which I'm assuming is when you finally want to really retire?
Yeah, I think the family want me to stop before then, Julia. Or to do less, anyway. The trouble is, when you have a passion for FE, Sam's got it. She's got amazing energy, as you know, Julia, Sam. And if you've got a passion for FE, it is hard to stop in a way, because it's a way of life. It's a sort of vocation. It's not just any old job. And I tried to convey that earlier. And I know it's the same for so many of the successful principals. I also wanted to say, when Sam talked about ethics, one of my favourite principals in the north east of England, he has the 7 Nolan principles of public life pinned on his wall in his office. And he said it was only after reading one of the FE Commissioner reports, he said, I just put it up. He said, the senior team need to see that I look at that occasionally. And I'm a great believer that you have to come back to that stuff about being a public service. What do I think the sector will be like in 9 years' time? Well, I thought the white paper was evolutionary. I was pleased about that. I also was pleased that it saw FE colleges absolutely firmly as part of the local and regional architecture. I've been through mad phases where people thought colleges would disappear. I mean, I think that's happened twice in my career, that there were policy people who started wondering, what will the world look like if we get rid of colleges? We're way beyond that now, which is fantastic. People realise that colleges are an essential part of the public service, and they need to be embedded in their local and sub-regional communities. So I believe we will have colleges. We'll have a few less, but I don't think we'll see as many. We're not going to see another 70 or 80 mergers. There's only 220 colleges at the moment, of which actually about 170 odd are properly GFE colleges, like London and South East and so on. I don't think we're going to go down to 100. We're going to go down a little bit further. There are some vulnerable ones, but we've done 1 or 2 demergers as well. We've disaggregations. We may see 1 or 2 of those around the country. So there'll be a little bit of structural change. But I think the main thrust will be on the things Sam and I talked about: quality, engagement. I think we'll be very popular for the next few years. I think lots of people are going to go into education, universities, colleges. After the pandemic, looks like we're going to have unemployment for a bit. I was around in the 80s when we had that. Education did well, in inverted commas, because it's a safe place to go. And it also, people value qualifications more when times are difficult. So I think colleges will be busy. They will exist. I hope they will be thriving, and they'll be firmly rooted in local communities and local sub-regions. I don't think we'll have lots of national groups. We had NCG, you remember that, and that was a model that was touted at the time. I don't think we'll see that again. I think we'll see much more regional, sub-regional locality. But the leaders of the future and the colleges of the future need to be more focused on quality and on the learner experience and on improving teaching and learning than anything else. And some of the other more, far-flung ideas need to be put in the filing cabinet and walk in the college, celebrating the success of learners, building the right spirit amongst the staff. They'll be the critical factors over the next 9 or 10 years. But the really great news is FE isn't going away. In fact, if anything, I hope it'll be even stronger in 10 years' time. And one of the little things I've always argued for would be some sort of protected brand. I'll be honest, protected title, like universities as a protected. Trouble with colleges is that every time I walk down Oxford Street, I see loads of them above the shops, and everywhere I go, and every school's called a college, and I kind of wish we had something distinctive, because these 170 colleges at the moment do an amazing job in their communities, and the more we can recognise that publicly, the better, I think.
So is there anything that you would like to see colleges do more of or do differently so that they can help provide greater outcomes for learners and for their local communities?
I suppose I would like to see, in my own experience as a principal and an employer and as a university governor, I'd probably like to see a higher percentage of young people and adults do technical and professional qualifications, and I'm less wedded to honours degrees. So where I'm very much in line with the Auger report is that I think honours degrees are great for the right academic people. But I mean, I used to be interviewing people with principal who were coming out with 2.2s from not very successful, you know, and I was offering them the salary they'd have got at 18 if they'd never gone to university in the first place, and now they've got debt. So I would like to see colleges have a bigger role with level 4 and 5, and both with adults returning as well. I'm very keen on the lifelong entitlement. I'd like to see adults returning and young people doing more of that. I like to see colleges that do a wide range of activity of the core business. I love it that London South East has your successful multi-academy trust. We had a multi-academy trust at my college, and so on. I think colleges, when they adopt the community leadership role and embed themselves and get the support of local authorities and LEPs and chambers of commerce and employ, what they can do in the education and training space is really significant, and good colleges can do that really well. So I see colleges as being bigger players in local space, having a strong employer, employability, independence, autonomy, focus. And I'd like to see them, as I said earlier, to have maybe something distinctive in their title that would make them stand out, and the country celebrate them as much as we culturally celebrate universities.
And I want to add to that, Julia, as well. I think on the back of that, really, I think is probably the one thing that I was a bit disappointed with, really, in the white paper, and also in the approach to the sort of post-Auger, and that is some degree of better delineation between the curriculum offer in the FE college as opposed to in the university or the school. And I think that, you know, the boundaries around which we operate, whether it's on you know, level 3 vocational and technical, level 4-5, or apprenticeship provision, there is a huge amount of competition. And I think some what Rich is talking about in terms of some kind of branding or distinctive name would also help, I think, some better delineation, particularly around careers advice and information, so young people can make more informed choices. I think it's still a very blurred picture out there, and both a better brand and better a boundary, if you like, between the product that is an FE product and why you would elect and choose to go to a college as opposed to a university or a school, and at those transition points being much clearer. I think, you know, the Baker Clause went some way towards that, but more is needed to provide greater clarification around those boundaries and transition points.
A final question from the audience there saying, so Richard, can you advise us about how we can respond immediately and perhaps differently from the past to help restore the economy and jobs for young people following COVID?
Yeah.
What are your final thoughts on that, do you think?
Yeah, I touched on that. I worry a lot about the unemployment figures that I saw this morning and the percentage of 16 to 24-year-olds in that. And as I say, I went through the late 70s and 80s when we had, you know, unemployment well above 3 million. And a range of programs launched. I think it's really, really important that the government makes available a range of education and training programs for young people. There'll be a wide range of people who are unemployed, and there need to be a wide range of programs. In those days, we ran a range of outreach programs in different settings, not just in colleges, to engage with those young people. So I think that's really important. I don't have a magic wand for stimulating the economy as such. I'm hoping, like everybody else, there'll be a bounce back when things open up again. But I am, and of course in London, you may have the curious advantage, mightn't you, of the 700,000 EU and other overseas workers who've gone home. So that may lead to a picture in London that's different to the rest of the country. But I do worry about youth unemployment, because the lesson of the 80s, the television programs, the films of the era. Some of you are too young to remember. I'm sorry, I remember it all, but they left a real mark on my memory and on the memory of my generation. Because once you were out of work for any length of time in your early 20s, you might never work again. And I've done work in a number of towns and cities. Grimsby leaps to mind, and Hull. In the former fishing communities there, you've got 3 generations of worklessness. People haven't worked since the fishing industry. So my worry is that worklessness can develop. So I think we need to engage people in a variety of ways in education and training. They must range from the slightly less formal to the highly formal. There should be outreach as well as at college. But for me, FE's best place to do all of this, because that's our heritage, and it's the sorts of people we work with. And I didn't mean to exclude adults at all. I think there'll be work to do with adults, but I particularly worry about people aged 16 to 24 who are unemployed for any length of time.
Thank you for that. Sam, any final thoughts on that and the impact of the pandemic and what colleges can do to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Richard said, fundamentally, a skills-led recovery, I think, is very much at the heart of the white paper, the government's plans, and, CBI and others very much advocating for that. I'm an absolute advocate that government needs to, heed the lessons of the things that have worked and not worked in the past. And Richard named many that he was involved in his early career. I joined FE in 92 in the early days of NVQs and the latter days of YTS and modern apprenticeships and things, and train to gain, etc., etc. So I think that there's an absolute evidence trail of policy amnesia over many years, where people forget the things that didn't work. And it's absolutely vital that, we're in a completely different climate now, and we must have schemes that work, that are well funded, that are not outcome based, as some of them are talking to be about, and that we have to have the right funding going into the system to sustain the risk that colleges are taking in working with larger numbers of unemployed people, where in our experience, outcomes which are generally about jobs, economic independence and progression, sometimes perversely in the past have unfairly penalised colleges in terms of success. So I'm really hoping that in the new world that we are going to be operating, measures of success, engagement and progression into jobs, which is what we all want, for people to be sustained in adulthood, economically independent and successful, that's very much at the heart of policy thinking and funding moving forward.
Thank you very much, and thank you both. All that is left for me to do is to hand you back over to Joe, who I think will end, and thank you for your contribution this afternoon.
Thank you all ever so much. Some great questions from our viewers there, and some great advice from all 3 of you as well. Thank you to Sir Richard Atkins, CBE, Dr. Sam Barrett, OBE, and Julia Belgutay. Thank you all ever so much for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you've got a better insight into the future of further education at London South East colleges. When the webinar ends, don't close your window, as you'll be able to pre-order the book itself that was mentioned earlier, Leading Change, Inspiring Learners, on the next web page. There it is. Once again, thank you all ever so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.